What if a man could hold a nation together and still feel that something in his own life had slipped through his hands? What if the voice that steadied millions carried doubts no one ever heard? What if the man we remember as resolute spent his quietest moments questioning what truly mattered? And what if at the very end he saw it clearly, but far too late to change it? We speak of Abraham Lincoln as if his story were clean, as if strength alone carried him through, as if the weight he bore shaped him into something certain, something complete. But that is not how a life unfolds. Not in the long nights when decisions echo louder than applause. Not in the silence that follows after a choice no one else wanted to make. Not when the cost of doing what is right begins to separate you from everyone who once stood close. There is a version of Lincoln the world knows. Measured, composed, unshaken. And then there is the man who stood behind that image. The one who learned slowly and painfully that a good life is not built the way people imagine. Not through approval, not through victory, not even through purpose alone. It is built through what you lose, what you endure, and what you come to understand when there is no longer time to correct it. Near the end, those understandings begin to take shape. Not as lessons neatly spoken, but as realizations that arrive quietly without ceremony. 5 of them stand out, not because they are comforting, but because they are true. There is a quiet belief most people carry for far too long, that if you are fair, if you are reasonable, if you try hard enough to understand everyone, then in time people will understand you too. It sounds right, it feels right, but it is not how life unfolds. For Abraham Lincoln, this belief did not break all at once. It wore down slowly under pressure in moments where every decision seemed to divide the very people he was trying to hold together. He stood between 2 sides that no longer trusted each other. Each believed they were right, each demanded something different, and each expected him to choose in their favor. So he tried to be careful. He weighed his words. He measured his actions. He searched for balance, for fairness, for something that could hold both sides without tearing the whole apart. And yet the more he tried to be fair, the more both sides turned against him. One side thought he was too slow. The other believed he had already gone too far. Some saw him as weak. Others saw him as dangerous. There were days when it seemed no matter what he did, it only gave someone a new reason to doubt him. That is the part people rarely speak about. Not the speeches, not the victories, but the constant grinding realization that doing what is right does not protect you from being misunderstood or disliked. In fact, it often guarantees it. There comes a moment, if you are paying attention, when something inside you shifts. You begin to see that trying to satisfy everyone is not a virtue. It is a slow erosion. You start to lose clarity, then conviction, and eventually something quieter but far more important: your sense of who you are. Lincoln saw it happen in real time. The more he reached outward trying to hold everything together, the more he risked losing his footing within himself. And in that tension, a harder truth began to take shape. Fairness does not earn approval. It demands a cost. And that cost is often paid in isolation and criticism, and in the quiet understanding that no decision you make will leave everyone satisfied. If that is true, then the question changes. Not how do you make everyone accept you, but what are you willing to stand for when they do not? Once you accept that you cannot satisfy everyone, something else begins to surface. A quieter cost, less visible, but far heavier. You begin to notice the space around you change. Voices that once spoke freely grow careful. Conversations shorten. People still stand near you, but not quite with you. There is a distance that cannot be measured, only felt. And slowly, without any clear moment where it begins, you find yourself alone. For Abraham Lincoln, this was not a sudden fall into isolation. It was a gradual narrowing. Each decision he made removed another layer of comfort. Each choice closed another door to easy agreement. There were rooms filled with people, advisors, officials, men who carried titles and opinions. But when it came to the weight of a decision, it rested in one place, with him. That is the part few people prepare for. They imagine responsibility as something shared, discussed, supported. But real responsibility, the kind that shapes outcomes, often arrives without company. And with it comes a silence that is difficult to explain. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of knowing that no one else can carry what you are about to choose. Lincoln began to understand this in the hardest way. The higher he stood, the fewer people could meet him there. Not because they did not want to, but because they could not see what he saw. They did not feel what he felt. They were not the ones who would be remembered for the outcome. So their words became lighter, and his thoughts became heavier. There is a moment in that kind of isolation where you are forced to ask yourself a question most people avoid for their entire lives. If no one agrees with you, if no one stands beside you, if the outcome may cost you everything, do you still move forward? Or do you step back, just enough to feel less alone? Lincoln learned that standing for something does not come with reassurance. It comes with distance. And if you are not ready for that distance, you will begin to adjust your choices, not based on what is right, but on what keeps you close to others. That is how people lose their direction. Not all at once, but quietly, gradually, almost without noticing, by choosing comfort over conviction. And once that shift happens, it is very difficult to reverse. Because now the question is no longer about what is right. It becomes something else entirely. What are you willing to endure? To remain who you are. There is a comforting idea people hold on to when things go wrong. That failure by itself will shape you into something better. That time and hardship will do the work for you. That simply enduring is enough. It is a gentle thought, and a dangerous one, because for Abraham Lincoln, failure was never rare. It came early. It came often. It came in forms that would have quietly ended the ambitions of most men. Lost elections, public doubt, private grief. Moments where the path forward narrowed until it almost disappeared. From a distance, it is easy to look at such a life and draw a simple conclusion that repeated failure built resilience, that each loss added something necessary, something valuable. But that is not what failure does on its own. Failure does not teach. It does not refine. It does not correct you. It simply leaves you with what happened and what you choose to do with it. There were moments when Lincoln could have turned away from what those failures revealed. He could have blamed circumstance. He could have hardened himself against reflection. He could have moved forward, unchanged, carrying the same blind spots into the next decision. Many people do. They experience the same patterns again and again and call it persistence. They repeat the same mistakes and call it determination. But nothing truly shifts. What made the difference was not the failure itself. It was the willingness to sit with it, to examine it without comfort, to ask questions that do not offer easy answers. Where was I wrong? What did I not see? What did I refuse to admit? These are not questions that feel productive in the moment. They slow you down. They unsettle you. They strip away the easier story you might tell yourself. But without them, failure remains just an event. With them, it becomes something else, a turning point. Lincoln came to understand that the hardest part was not enduring defeat. It was facing it honestly. Because once you do that, you lose the ability to pretend. You can no longer move forward unaware. You carry clarity with you, and clarity has a weight of its own. It demands change. And change is never comfortable. So the question becomes unavoidable. Not whether you will fail, but whether you are willing to see it clearly when you do. There is a point after you have endured criticism, isolation, and failure where you begin to believe that if you just explain yourself clearly enough, people will finally understand. That truth spoken plainly will correct the way you are seen. That if you are patient and precise and honest, the misunderstanding will fade. It rarely does. For Abraham Lincoln, this was not an abstract idea. It was a daily reality. Words he chose carefully were taken apart. Decisions made with hesitation were described as weakness. Actions meant to preserve something fragile were recast as something else entirely. And the more visible he became, the less control he had over how he was understood. That is the quiet paradox of being seen. The more people look at you, the less they actually see you. Each person brings their own expectations, their own fears, their own version of who you are supposed to be. And once that image forms, it is remarkably difficult to change. You can speak, you can explain, you can try to correct the record, but most people are not listening to understand. They are listening to confirm what they already believe. There comes a moment when this becomes clear, not in a dramatic way, not in a single event, but in the repetition of it. The same misunderstanding again and again, no matter how carefully you respond. And in that repetition, something shifts. You begin to see that your image was never yours to control. It belongs to the people who are looking at you. What remains yours is something much smaller and much harder to protect. Your choices. Lincoln came to understand that there is a limit to explanation, a point where continuing to defend yourself only drains what little clarity you have left. So the focus changes, not on how you are perceived, but on whether what you are doing still aligns with what you believe is right. It is a quieter way of living, less reactive, less concerned with approval, but it comes with a cost. You must let go of being understood. And that is not easy, because to be misunderstood, especially when you have tried to act with care, feels like a kind of injustice. Yet, the alternative is worse: to begin shaping your actions around how they will be received. That is where direction is lost, not through one decision, but through many small adjustments, each one made to avoid being seen the wrong way, until eventually, you are no longer acting from conviction at all. You are reacting. And once that happens, it becomes difficult to remember what you believed in the first place. So the question remains, if people will misunderstand you anyway, what will you choose to stand on? There is one final illusion that lingers longer than the rest, that there will be time to repair what has been strained, time to return to what was set aside, time to say what was left unsaid, time to become the person you quietly intended to be. It is a gentle assumption, almost comforting, and it is often wrong. For Abraham Lincoln, life was not a straight line moving toward completion. It was a series of demands, each one urgent, each one necessary, each one pulling his attention further away from the quieter parts of life that do not demand, but wait. And waiting has a limit. There are moments that pass without announcing their importance. Conversations that seem ordinary until they are no longer possible. Days that feel like any other until they become the last chance you had to choose differently. This is not something people notice in real time. You do not wake up and recognize that a door is about to close. You do not see clearly which moments will matter later. You move forward, assuming there will be another opportunity to return, to correct, to give more attention to what you postponed. Lincoln came to understand this not through theory, but through absence, through things that could not be revisited, through time that did not wait, through the quiet realization that some parts of life do not offer a second attempt. And when that understanding settles in, it does not arrive with noise. It arrives with stillness. You begin to see that many of the things you worried about did not matter as much as you believed. The approval you chased, the arguments you carried, the impressions you tried to manage, they fade. What remains is far simpler and far more difficult to accept. The time you gave, and the time you did not. There is no way to reclaim it, no way to return to a moment once it has passed, no explanation that restores it, no intention that replaces it, only the awareness that it is gone. And that awareness changes the weight of everything. The decisions you delay, the people you overlook, the things you tell yourself you will do later. Later is not a promise. It is a possibility. And sometimes it does not arrive. Lincoln saw this clearly, but not early. And that may be the quietest truth of all. A good life is not defined only by what you achieve or endure or stand for. It is defined by whether you recognized what mattered while there was still time to live it. So now the question turns not to him, but to you. What are you leaving for later, assuming it will still be there? And if it is not, what would that change? By the time these things become clear, they no longer arrive as advice. They arrive as a kind of quiet accounting, not of success, not of failure, but of what was given and what was missed. For Abraham Lincoln, these realizations did not sit neatly one after another. They overlapped. They reinforced each other, each one revealing something the others could not fully explain on their own. That trying to satisfy everyone only leads to losing yourself. That standing for something will often leave you standing alone. That failure changes nothing unless you are willing to face it without comfort. That being understood is never something you can secure. And that time, once it moves past you, does not return. Individually, each truth is difficult. Together, they form something harder to ignore. A different way of seeing what a good life actually is. Not a life where everything aligns. Not a life where you are approved, supported, understood, and given endless time to adjust your course. But a life where you choose repeatedly what matters, even when it costs you. A life where you accept that clarity often comes with distance. A life where you are willing to look directly at what goes wrong instead of turning away. A life where you act from conviction, not from how you will be seen. And a life where you recognize early enough that time is not something to be assumed. There is no comfort in this, no easy reassurance. Only a kind of steadiness. Because once you see these things clearly, you stop negotiating with them. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You stop adjusting yourself to fit every expectation. You stop believing that understanding will come from others if you just explain a little more. You begin to act with a different kind of precision. Quieter, more deliberate, less concerned with how it appears, more grounded in what it is. This is not a transformation people notice from the outside. It does not announce itself, but it changes the direction of a life. And perhaps that is the final point. These are not lessons meant to be admired in someone else. They are recognitions that ask something of you, not later, now. So the question is no longer what Lincoln understood. It is whether you will wait until you understand it the same way he did, or whether you will see it clearly while there is still time to live differently.